I'll give a few seconds for everybody to get logged in and settled in here, and then we'll get started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Julian Hawkins. I'm the Assistant Executive Director here at the County Chairs Association. Thank you all for joining us here this morning for this installment of our virtual training series on campaign budgeting. We're joined today by Zach Koutsky, who is the Political Director for UFCW Local 881. He's also an Obama presidential campaign alumni and served as the campaign manager for Mike Frerichs' 2014 run for state treasurer, which was one of the closest races in Illinois history. So before I turn it over to him, just a reminder that we're going to keep everybody muted during the training, but if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat and we'll get to that at the end. And without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Zach and I'll get your presentation pulled up.
Great. Thanks, Julian. Good morning, fellow Democrats. I'm up in Chicago and it is raining, but we've been needing that. So hopefully everyone's staying dry and healthy and safe in these times. So as Julian said, my name is Zach Koutsky. I live in Chicago here. I've got two kids who may be making an appearance as this goes on. It's a Saturday morning and rain, and that's a perfect combination for them to probably cause havoc. And my wife, who's a small business owner up here, we live in the North Center neighborhood. And I'm honored to work for Local 881 United Food and Commercial Workers, which if you're up here, Jules, Mariano's, CVS. If you're downstate, Kroger, Schnucks, Dieberg's, Streck Van Til, and then a bunch of other companies that make food or process food, and increasingly cannabis. We've been proud to be the most aggressive union in organizing in the new cannabis industry here in Illinois. And we've actually got a couple elections taking place downstate. Huge supporter of the Chairs Association, as Julian said. When I ran Treasurer Frerichs' race in 14, that was not a good year for Democrats. And one of our greatest assets was to have the Chairs Association be revitalizing itself in the party in every corner of the state. And that was a huge boon to us as a downstate candidate, and somebody that, ultimately won by less than one vote per precinct. Because the mail-in balloting that put us over the top, we were almost 30,000 votes, and we were up just over 10,000. I almost missed my honeymoon because of that, but it was worth it in the end. We had a good time. So thank you to the Chairs Association, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Jim, do you want to move it forward? PowerPoint. There we go. My beautiful family. Alhead now is 4.5, and Harper is 2.5, so they're definitely not as gossip looking as they are there. If folks want to connect, I put my Twitter on there and also LinkedIn, and would be happy to follow up with you at any point coming out of this. So, Julian, do you want to kick us to the next one? All right. So the budget is kind of your foundational document with your campaign. You've got to figure out how you're going to fund the campaign. And I'm assuming most people are running for local office or will be running for local office. So even for a Hart District race or a county board race, trusteeship, you name it, you would need a budget to understand how to, oh, it looks like audio is breaking up. Does that happen with you as well, Julian? Okay, let me put them on and get earphones. All right.
All right.
I don't want folks to not be able to hear. So give me 2 seconds.
No worries. For any of you that joined after we got started today, just a reminder that everyone's going to be remaining muted during the training, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat at any time, and we'll go through those at the end.
All right. Let's try that again. Can folks hear me better now? Better?
Sounds good.
I go to move to find my headphones, and of course, kids have moved them, so this was a little tangled. All right, so sorry about that. Back to the foundational document, which is your budget. That basically is going to give you the roadmap and the game plan on what you're ultimately going to be able to do. And we're Democrats, so we believe always, always, always voter contact is the best utilization of your budget. That's how you actually talk to your fellow voters and make your case. It's not to, pad out, a sweet campaign office or, sign up an expensive consultant. It's to spend money talking to voters about our values and how we're going to make their lives better. So I typically tell anybody, at minimum, an election is about a year long. In most cases, it's well beyond that because you've been thinking about running, you've been, anticipating, making the jump into office. So you've got some time to kind of research. And what I always tell, particularly first-time candidates or candidates going for local office, it's not, as simple as, and I say that as, not necessarily simple, but it's not as easy as, running for Congress or for Senate or president or governor, where, you've got to spend a ton of money on TV, you've got to spend a ton of money on digital. You oftentimes for a local office don't have like a ready-made roadmap that you've been exposed to. So you need to spend some time researching what that past campaigns for an office like yours looks like. And so you would go to the State Board of Elections. You would also then begin to determine what your expected turnout is, your vote goal, then to get you that 50% plus one, or if there's, some third party, candidate in there, maybe a little less, to figure out then what you're actually going to need to raise. And then you begin to actually build out the budget. So Julian, the next one. So a couple places that you can get a real good idea on where to research a budget. One would be a website that my friend Scott Kennedy runs here. It's a great Twitter account if you follow it, good Facebook one as well. It's called Illinois Election Data. And what Scott has done, in that link in that should work, is he's compiled back to 2000, so almost 20 years worth of campaign spending for, everything from state Senate, state rep, all the way up to Congress and statewide. To give you an idea of historically what winning campaigns spend and what they spend it on. Now, again, if you're running for county board, if you're running for, countywide office, trustee, park district, you're going to look at those numbers and say, well, there's no way I can raise, the millions of dollars. But what doesn't change when you're running for a local office all the way up to, again, a statewide or federal office is the categories by which you're spending it on. And you'll notice a big trend with those that are successful beyond having a good environment and year or district behind you is they're always, always, always spending it far more on direct voter contact so that their message is being burnt in. Additionally, because you might be running for a more local office, the State Board of Elections website has campaign disclosures that if you're filing your quarterly reports, you're well aware of. And what that again can do is you can find somebody that's run for a county board, a park district, a trustee or a council person in your hometown to see what they had spent in years past, who they spent it with, what they spent it on. So that gives you a good idea of A, how much you'll likely have to raise, B, what you would be expected to spend it on, and even, again, ideally if you're looking at Democrats, who they spent it with. So that'll give you a good idea for some of the vendors that you're going to need to begin to contact, to price out, to build out your budget. So those are some things that you can just spend, late at night, or if you've got some downtime, to start to get a sense, again, how you're spending, what you're spending it on, and who you would be spending it with for a race similar to yours. But that's all going to be informed ultimately on what it takes to win, right? So there's a million ways you can construct a likely voter universe, but again, past is prologue most times. So here, to go back to a race similar to yours, you would go to your local county clerk or election authority, pull the last 2, maybe even the last 3 elections that you will able to get data for. You can cinch that out then to your district or to your region and get a good broad-based estimate on what to expect for voter turnout. If it's a presidential year where they're electing county board candidates, if it's an off-year election for trustee, my dog is making some jiggling sound back there, my apologies. For local township or nonpartisan municipal office, it'll be a lower turnout. But you can pull data from all types of elections, in cycle, off year, and get a conglomeration and an understanding of voters that come out. And then you can build a model from that. So you can have a high end and a low end for expected turnout. And ideally then, what you would be able to look at is what people won with in that same race in years past to give you an idea of what your win number is going to be. And for us, it's always going to be at least 50% plus 1. And most of my field plans, I always build out 52% to give you even a little bit more of a buffer so that you've got a healthy universe that you're communicating to that gives you a little bit more of a buffer, so that you can find more votes elsewhere. So that will, again, take some research, take some time. Obviously, if you've got the voter file, this goes a lot faster, but if you don't have that yet, you've got to go through your local election authority. You can request all that. Most times it'll be completely free. And it allows you to start playing around with the numbers and to give you an idea of how many voters you're ultimately going to need to be talking to. A couple things within that number that you're going to want to split out. Again, really helps if you have the voter file through your local county party or if you've purchased it, would be to figure out how many voters, how many households, and how many phone numbers you have, because that gives you an idea then of how many voters you'll actually be able to communicate with, you'll actually be able to contact. And those numbers will vary considerably, and think about it. You could have 500 voters, but you could have 5 people living in each house. So you only have 100 homes that you would need to be mailing to. And within that, you might only have 95 phone numbers that are still good. So that will all help you to, again, determine ultimately who you're trying to contact, how you're going to contact them, and what that cost is going to be. And then from there, you begin to start building out your budget. For local races, an Excel spreadsheet is going to work just fine. And there are any number of, sample spreadsheets that are out there that break it down by month and by, category of expenditure. There's also ones that do that then for money coming in. So what you're raising, what you're spending on that. If you're running a little bit more of a robust race with a better fundraising capacity, you will probably want to get some software For Democrats, we have NGP and VAN. NGP tracks your fundraising, accounts for all of your fundraising, can actually help with filing with your state board of elections or your local election authority. And that can also link up to other software. Again, these are costs, but other software like QuickBooks that help you track your spending in real time that are linked up to your bank accounts and maybe a credit card or two on that end. But I would always recommend that you build out a budget, kind of your platinum, gold, and bronze, Cadillac, Ford, Pinto, version on that gives you a wide variance so that you can have kind of your best case scenario when you're knocking it out of the park on fundraising. Your kind of more realistic scenario would be the middle one, and then the oh shit scenario would be the last one, so that you've got a plan then that still allows you to figure out what you need to raise, what you need to spend it on, but that still gets you to your win in a great, good, and middling scenario in that regard. So always build out at least 3 budgets. Most campaigns that I've ever worked on or engaged with typically end up somewhere between the oh shit and the, okay, this is, kind of a little bit more realistic. Only in kind of the best case scenarios are people exceeding or exactly meeting their fundraising targets and are then able to, enact the kind of top of the line budget on that end. All right, next one. So again, once you've done the research, you can start to kind of formulate your budget. These two, this green and red, just screenshots that I took from those sample budgets, again, from that Illinois election data website, gives you, again, kind of just some really good ideas on what to expect to have to plan for. Where are you getting your money in? How are you getting it in? Is it through individuals, making those Act Blue contributions? Is it transfers in from state PACs that have the ability to spend more money? Is it a loan that you're making to yourself or from a family member? Is it an in-kind contribution? Somebody can't give you $5,000, but you have a friend that owns a restaurant or a bar, and they'll allow you to host a fundraising event or an organizing event or work out of a front storefront there that they'll give you. Those are things that you have to still treat as income or money raised and have to report that as such to the election authorities. But those are your receipts coming in or your receivables coming in. What's going out then are the disbursements. And again, we're Democrats. We want to spend money on talking to voters as directly as possible. That's on the doors when we're allowed to do that. Again, that's in the mailboxes, that's over the phones, that's texting, and that's now increasingly digital. And then for even some local races, you might get onto radio, you might buy print advertisement, I wouldn't recommend it. And you might even, let's say you've really hit the jackpot on raising, you'll get on your local cable zone, for TV ads on that end. That's what we want to spend talking to voters. So at a minimum, when you're constructing this budget, you're going to want to set a floor of at least 70%, ideally 80% spend on direct contact to voters. That can come again in a bunch of different scenarios. If you've got somebody that you need to hire, as a consultant rather than a direct staff, that would be your fundraising consultant, your media consultant, if you've got a friend that helps you with digital design and promotion. From there, you've got to run then a fundraising operation. So you've got to figure out what it's going to cost to mail fundraising invites, to host an event like that. If you need to engage with a legal entity to make sure that your petitions are all set, that if you have a court challenge to your ability to be on the ballot, you would need to set aside some money for legal. Hopefully for local offices, you generally would not be doing that. If you've got the ability to not work out of your garage or your office, and you actually need an office storefront or the local party office, you would set that aside for rent and utilities. If you've got staff, you would have that set aside for payroll taxes on that come along with it. If you've got the ability then to, foresee that you would need to do some polling, or that you would be buying into polling with your local county party or a slate of candidates. You would be able to set aside some money for that, or research. Again, not research for budget, but research for yourself and for your opponent. That's oppo research and self-research. You know, you're going to be driving around a lot, likely. I don't think flying around a lot. So you're going to want to probably set aside some money for gas or gas cards. You know, so this gives you an idea, again, of what generally to expect to spend on. And, you know, realizing our time constraint here made less so because I didn't have my headphones in. You can I'm not going to get into the details of like what to expect for cost on, you know, what a full mail program would be. But there's some great resources out there. The National Democratic Training Committee, which I believe the Chairs Association is partnering with, they have basically like vendor costs on average available to you. So if you could say, okay, well, I know I need to do mail, but how much does mail cost? Good rule of thumb, about $1 for production, and then add postage onto that, even with a bulk mail rate. So you're looking at about $1.50, $1.60 for one piece of mail. That can obviously go less if you're printing in-house and not using a union printer, although you always should be using a union printer. But if you're doing, even postcards, that obviously lessens the cost of direct mail on that. But there's a great resource that the NDTC provides to you that kind of splices all this out. What should you expect on average to spend for a digital program? What should you expect to spend on mail? What's been on average for a digital consultant or a mail consultant? That can then help kind of funnel that cost and expectation in. Again, for local races, I would always lean on your local party or friends that do it. You'd be amazed what somebody that does graphic design for their company or on the side can do when kind of given the creative freedom of drawing up mail pieces and digital on that. So always think first how you can kind of go to your network and to your party to provide that to you. But if, again, this is a larger scale race, or you might not have that in your network, there is some really great work that's already been done to put that together to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. And then again, the local Chairs Association, your local party, some of the research you've done will tell you then who in your region, who in your state has done this type of consulting work. So then you can contact them and start getting direct pricing from them on what that'll cost for your race. But bottom line, these are generally the areas by which you would raise money and spend money on. So you can always build that out into your spreadsheet or put that into your, QuickBooks, fields. But if it turns out that, when you get it all said and done with your budget, gold, bronze, and silver, and it isn't about 70 to 80% spent on direct voter contact, you've got to go back to that budget and rework it. All right, Julian, next one. All right, so that's, again, you're kind of year plus out. Even now, if you're running for local office next year, we're in petition season. So this would generally be at least when you're starting that research phase or had done that earlier in the summer. You've now constructed your budget and you're beginning the actual active phase of your campaign. So you're likely in the field right now with petitions, or you're planning on going to early vote sites for petitions. But 9 to 6 months out, you really want to start kind of checking in on what your raising is. You've done that contact out to the vendors to really start to price them out for what it's going to cost to run your program. And you've got a better sense as well of locking in your voter universe. If you're in cycle now in September for the November 3rd election, your voter universe should already be locked. If it isn't, lock it in to have a full expectation of who you're going to be contacting and who you're going to be planning on actually making it to the polls. Because we all know in about 2 weeks, they're going to have ballots in hand. If they've requested a vote by mail ballot, they're going to be getting more ballots in hand because there's going to be those reminders coming out. And there's going to be that natural upsurge that always comes with in-person early voting. So you've got to have a real clear sense of what your voter universe is so that you can start hammering them in the mailboxes, on the phones, if you're doing lit drops at their doors, and of course, digitally. So about 9 to 6 months out, I really consider that more the review process. So Julian? All right. So this is kind of the more, daily, weekly process of looking back at your budget, checking in, seeing how you're doing. How's your fundraising doing? Are you lining up more with your bronze, gold, or silver fundraising goals? And how is that then going to affect what you're able to spend? Do you have really good commitments that just haven't come in yet? If so, lock those down. But this is a good time to really start kind of being realistic with how your fundraising plan is going or is starting out. Typically with fundraising, you will see a surge right when you start it, and then a big drop off, and that kind of becomes the grind of just getting in those checks and those contributions, and then you'll see a surge right at the end. So you've got to kind of do a little bit of forecasting, a little gut check, a little bit of faith on how that's looking, but you've got to be realistic with yourself. So again, are you starting to kind of lean more towards a different type of budget because of your fundraising? For vendors then, you should have made contact with folks that'll do the mail and the digital and the phones. What are they getting back to you for cost? If you're in cycle now, you're probably hearing a lot, I'm really busy. The cost may have gone up, particularly this cycle for phones or for peer-to-peer texting, because so many people are doing it that there's just a huge demand. If you've got a pollster, if you're polling right now, it's really difficult because everybody's polling right now. So that cost may be going up. So you want to try and lock them in early as possible to get a good rate and then to hold them to that. But again, where is that starting to really kind of land on that? And again, ultimately, where is that then landing with your expectation for who your voters are, what that universe is going to be? And at this point, you really should be locking it in and say, this is the number that I know if I communicate to, I'll find my 50% plus one in. And, oh, excuse me. Okay, sorry, I've got a full-on meltdown in the background with my little kids. And then you're just going forward with that voter universe. And that's what you've committed yourself to. That's who you're going to be communicating to. And that is now not going to deviate a whole lot on that. So you've locked in your voter universe then. All right, Julian. All right. So you've got your money raised, you've got your budget, you're starting to execute it with your program for mail and direct voter contact. You're in the home stretch. For us in cycle right now, that starts in about really 2 weeks, because that's when voters actually can be voting. Not just requesting, but they'll have those ballots in hand, and early voting then opens up in every county at least one site. So this is where, it gets a little harder because the calendar is working against you, and you're feeling the heat individually. So you've got to really kind of do a much more consistent gut check and a budget check. So what might have been a weekly review on Sunday night, before you start the week, what came in, what do I need to spend, what checks need to go out, what wiring needs to go out. You're now probably doing that on a more daily basis, at minimum a couple of times a week. This is also where you need to really be realistic. And you need to be, I don't want to put conservative on there, so I said restrained. You probably will really, really, really need to understand that it's rarely, if ever, worth it to go into debt individually for you. You also don't want to be that person that stiffs a vendor or a staffer. So you need to make sure that the commitments you've made to run the race that you need to are doable. So this is where you're revisiting much more often both your budget, your expectations, and your commitments that you've made up to this point. So that's kind of the home stretch. So Julian? Again, you're checking in on that budget. I've worked races before where that budget is on my phone in a Google Doc, is in my QuickBooks, and is being looked at me volume. It might not be anywhere near that activity, but it is something that you need to commit yourself to. Don't let those checks sit on your desk, not get entered into your bank account, and not get then updated into your budget. It needs to be done as often as humanly possible on that end. This is also where I would say, if you've got somebody that's a little bit more financially savvy, has an accounting background, has just a good eye for numbers, have them check your work. In a campaign, ideally that's a campaign manager and the finance consultant, or finance staff, or deputy campaign manager. For local races, it's usually you, your friend, or somebody that's done this before that's helping you out on your race, your spouse, your partner. I know in my house, I rarely get to mess with my household budget. So you want another set of eyes on it. Was there a mistake in the Excel formula? Has your QuickBooks not been syncing up? Are things just looking on a more realistic and accurate path? What I would also say is, in most cases, most budgets starting about 2 to 3 months out go from a monthly expenditure to a weekly expenditure. If you're on a larger scale race right now, we go by weeks. So I believe right now we're in week 7 we're coming into week 7 of the election, and your spend is happening on a weekly, if not daily basis on that end that's being tracked. So your budget, even for a year and a half, can be on a monthly basis, but for the final spend, it should be broken out by a week. This is also when you're revising. Have those commitments actually come in? Has that fundraising plan really matched up? If not, it's time to readjust. And it's time to do so without any reservation. It may hurt, you may be disappointed, you thought you were going to get there, but them's the stakes, right? You've got to be realistic with yourself. You've got to be realistic with the folks that you've initiated with. And really, again, it's very rare worth going into debt or stiffing somebody and being a deadbeat because you were spending more than you were taking in. What I would also say then, if you're on a race where you've got mail, digital, phone, radio, TV, there's a few ways that you have to prioritize spending. Mail, you have to always pay for upfront. You have to pay for the design, printing, and postage. That isn't something that you can do 3 weeks out and expect it to work. You're going to have to pay for that mail program in its entirety, or damn near its entirety, weeks, if not months out before those pieces start to hit. And that's because there's a whole process that has to take place before those direct mail pieces start landing in mailboxes. Digital and paid phones, though, don't require that. You may only need a day or two advance on that. Again, once you've made that communication with the vendor, you lock in what you're going to do with it. You've approved your script, you've approved your design, you've approved your targeting, and then you wire the money, and the next day the calls start or the digital spend starts. TV, again, there's production. Radio, there's production. There's actually the purchase, the placement of those ads. That requires you to pay up front, but are easy to add to once you've got it going. So if you again see coming into those final few weeks, a nice little uptick in commitments that are coming in, but you would have loved to have had 4 or 5 weeks ago, but now in the final couple weeks are coming in, you can always add to that on the digital. You can always add to that on the radio. You can always add to that on the TV. It's much harder to add to that on the mail because there's just a backlog in the production, the processing, the mailing of it for it to really land on that end. And then the execution. Again, at this point in time, it's very rarely worth hiring another consultant, running another poll. If it is worth running another poll, you're not going to do a full poll. You're going to probably do a tracker. You might find somebody if you're running for county board, but you're running county-wide, or I'm sorry, if you're running for a county-wide office, but there's a state rep, state senate campaign that's running. They're likely going to be doing a tracker poll right at the end. You could pay into that campaign and say, hey, can you just ask me a question and at least get a little, data from that end on a much more expensive, much more robust poll that can, again, help inform just how you're doing on that. So if you're going to have some money coming in, again, the vast majority of it, if not all of it, should be going to direct voter contact, adding on to those purchases and those buys you've already made for voter contact. But if you need a little bit more research, if you need, last burst of hiring for, people to, palm card out at early vote sites or for GOTV to, do some paid canvassing, that would all be, good use of your money. Also, I would say at that time, last one would be, if you know that you've already gone into debt, if you've been floating your campaign on, the gas for the last year, and you see some money coming in, but your spend's already, been met at minimum for your budget, maybe you could pay yourself back on that. If not, that's an in-kind to the campaign that you've nicely done for yourself. But again, vast majority of that money, that late money, should be put towards direct voter contact, adding anything you can to the buys you already made. All right. That's how you're going to win. I would say in the races I've run on congressional, on local, and on statewide, I was checking the budget about 2 days out from the end of the election because I wanted to make sure that everybody was paid, that we had a little bit of a buffer. That was one thing I neglected to mention. I always build in a buffer. If you think something's going to cost you $500, I put in $700. When you actually get that, invoice sent to you and it was $550, great. I've got 150 extra bucks now that I can shift around anywhere else. But towards the end of the campaign, I'm making sure the cupboard is bare. I've spent down. I'm not holding on to a big chunk of money for whatever reason or for the next race, even if you're feeling pretty good. I'm making sure those invoices have been paid. My staff or vendors or consultants have been paid. I'm not too worried about doing victory parties at this point because we shouldn't be gathering indoors because there's a pandemic. So you don't need to hold back money for a nice open bar, buy yourself a nice bottle of scotch or whiskey or wine, whatever your preference is there, and celebrate at home with your family. But I really spend down. At most, I think, I was looking back on it even from the Frerichs race, I had about 4% of my budget remaining as we went into election day. Even though we went into a recount, and this year, election day will really be election weeks because there's going to be so much mail-in balloting. Even though I spent down because we were in a 2-week recount for the Frerichs campaign, more money came in. People wanted to make sure that we had the resources. So if you're in a situation like that, where you're going to need to pay people to elections or the election authority to watch the process, hire an attorney, you'll get money if you're in a fight. But you would hate to look back, a week out after election day, realize that you held back a couple $100 or $1,000 and you came up short because you didn't spend a little extra on digital or phones or to pay out that last mail piece to really get, again, your message burnt in. So I spend down and I make sure that there's a little bit of a buffer, but no more than necessary. And then, ideally you're celebrating because, damn it, Democrats need to win. So that is it for me.
Great, thank you very much, Zach. And a reminder that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat now. You mentioned, and obviously it's something that's big on everybody's mind, the pandemic currently has changed a lot of how we normally campaign. Does that change anything for budget considerations, in your opinion?
Yeah, it does. I think most people, because we're Democrats, we really enjoy a robust field effort. So 6 months ago, when you were in that kind of, phase where you're really starting to build out and lock in your voter universe, we probably had a ton of money set aside for staff, for a field office, for, a ton of palm cards and door hangers. That probably has been shifted entirely on its head. There's way more mail now. There's way more digital spending right now. A lot more people are going into live dial phones because every race that I've talked to right now, people are picking up their cell phones, particularly in a rate that you never would have before. Before, you would have been happy to hit 10, 12% for every dial that you make for actually connecting with somebody. I just talked to a state Senate campaign out in the suburbs yesterday. They're at 34% right now for connect on phones. And that is just absurd, right? So they are dumping a ton more money into texting, a ton more money into the phones, because in some cases, that's even a better outcome than you would have gotten from a really robust field effort, knocking on doors. You're connecting with more people, and you're doing so at a cheaper cost. So that definitely has shifted, on that end. I also know that, some people, because people are on their computers a lot more because they're working from home, some people are, particularly older folks, are really watching TV right now. I talked to a couple county board races out in the suburbs here, and one county exec race where they've big time upped their cable buys because people are just watching the cable networks a lot more. And so because cable is cable, you can buy zone. So you can narrow that in pretty well to voters in your district, in that region. It's pretty efficient. They're doing that in a world, again, even probably 4 months ago, they never would have been thinking they would have been buying cable for a county exec race or for even a county board race. But it just makes sense right now.
And what about, it seems like every year there's new technology, new apps, things that come out that are supposed to, change campaigning. What's your opinion on spending money on that kind of stuff as opposed to traditional, phone calls, TV, radio ads, things like that?
I'm a field guy at heart. Every race I've worked on since 2006, I've been either running it or on the field side of it. I have yet to buy into the cult of digital as though that should be something that we're 50-50 on. It is an incredible resource to overlay on top of the traditional spend that we know that works, mail and direct voter contact, to then lay over really good digital buys. And again, that doesn't have to be just, paid, Facebook promotion. That can be, if you're working with a digital firm, buying those top banner ads, buying those Google search ads. Those are all things that should be done regardless, because that's, where people are just living right now. But nothing in my mind still replaces direct voter contact and a known quantity, particularly to be able to track who those voters are in consuming that. Mail is going to hit that house. That phone number is going to be connected to that person. That TV is going to be watched, and that's compiled data, or radio that's compiled data and has, decades worth of, cross checks on that data of who's watching it by age and by demographic and by zone. That's a hard thing to walk away from, because we know you're best informed by the data, you're best informed by the history coming into it. So I would never hesitate to, again, go with what we know that works, and let others be the experiment, let others be the guinea pig. When you win and you're running for re-election, you can try that out then.
All right, we have a question here. You named a couple pitfalls like over polling. Are there any other pitfalls that campaigns should generally avoid? And any specific maybe to this pandemic time period, any pitfalls that we should watch out for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been in my role as a legislative and political director for a statewide union. We are engaging in races across the state, from very local all the way up to presidential. I think early on was, and even still now, I'd pick up on it, some people thinking that this is not the time for politics, that people don't want to, they're worried about their health, they're worried about their, the massive economic displacement, they're worried about their community, if there's some unrest. This is not the time. I should kind of throttle down on talking about politics. And I just could not more strenuously disagree. All of those are tied back to politics, and particularly at the local level. What your local county or city health department is able to do right now is because of the public funding that elected officials set for it. We need that. We need politics now more than ever to tie these, seemingly insurmountable issues back to the local, back to the individual. So I would not, there were some people that were like, oh, I'm going to kind of pull back on the mail, or I'm not going to run, as cutting of a, attack on my opponent. No, you need to win to get our people in there to run a better government. So any sense of people don't want to hear about it right now, people don't want to talk, don't believe it. There's going to be record turnout. Every single primary, hell, even in some of the caucuses before the Inside Times began, we were setting records for turnout. Even with non-traditional voter registration programs taking place, because we're all inside, you're starting to see registration meet 2018 and 2020 levels, particularly in like really intense battlegrounds or districts. People are engaged and they're going to be at the ballot box. It's incumbent on you then as a candidate to get in front of them and let them know who you are. So I would not pull back on any of the spending on that. I think specifically you said about polling, if you're in a position to run a poll, it's always good to try and at least budget for like a tracker. And a tracker poll is you run your kind of baseline poll, and you do that a couple months out before you've spent any money. You do that to get a sense of the electorate, the environment that you're in, ideally some messaging that you're gonna then run forward on, and who you are. And that gives you just kind of a baseline. This is where a generic Democrat, generic Republican are at this point in time. But if I talk about these issues and my background, it pulls me into this position. A tracker then, so that initial baseline poll should be what's setting forward your spending. A tracker then would be done after a lot of that spending has taken place, where it started to burn in. You've had 4 or 5 mail pieces land. You've had a robust phone program. Maybe you're up on cable zone TV. Again, you could buy into somebody else's poll who's also going to do a tracker poll at a far less cost, for 1 or 2 questions about your specific race on that end. So that's worth it, but only if you really have the money for it. I would not ever, prioritize a tracker poll as opposed to another mail piece or a digital buy or anything like that. I would, again, direct voter contact at the end of the day is the best. The other thing I think some people get bogged down on is being pitched, which I've seen, just a huge uptick on this cycle, on like auto dialers, predictive dialers, by a phone vendor, because so many people are trying to contact via the phone, as opposed to a live dialer, which is literally somebody sitting, well, not in a call center right now, so probably at home, dialing. It's more expensive, but the connect rate and the value of that conversation, the quality of that conversation is going to be so much better than a predictive, certainly a robo call, but even a predictive call that's, there's a lag time in pickup. They can't dial cell phones. So I would, say I would always lean more towards the live dial, or getting yourself a predictive dialer that you and your volunteers and family and friends can run internally rather than paying for that. So that might be another pitfall that, right now is particularly more pertinent.
All right, well, a reminder to everybody that we did record today's session. So if you missed anything or want to review it, you'll get a link to that later on in next week. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Zach. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. If you have any questions, I think you put your Twitter account down in there. I'm going to put my email account here, and we're happy to follow up with you by email if you have any questions after the session ends today. And thank you so much for joining us here on a Saturday morning. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, and thanks for everything you're doing for the party in your community.
Thank you.